Copper Sun, Chapter 24, Gator Bait. Clay sauntered unannounced into Teeny's kitchen one hot afternoon. Teeny, making crust for a pie, was shuttled back and forth, carefully watching over Polly, who was peeling apples, and Amari, who was stirring a mixture of apple juice and brown sugar over the fire. Titbit sat on the floor, tracing the path of an ant in the dust of the floor with his finger. Hush Puppy growled softly, and everyone looked up. Amari cringed when she saw who had entered, the barely healed lashes on her back suddenly aching, but Clay did not even look at her. "Y'all better keep that vermin dog out of the kitchen where my food is prepared," he said, without warning. "Yes, sir," Teeny mumbled, without question. "I told you to get that dog out of here," she said softly to Titbit. "Take him out to the barn, you hear?" "Yes'm," the boy replied, obediently, as he hurried to the door with the dog. Just as Titbit got to the doorway, Clay grabbed the child, picked him up, and slung him over his shoulder. Titbit screamed with fear, while Hush Puppy barked fiercely. With one swift movement, Clay raised one heavy boot and kicked Hush Puppy, propelling the dog out the door of the kitchen and into the yard. The dog yelped and limped away. "What you gonna do with my boy, sir?" Teeny asked fearfully. To Titbit, she said, "Hush now, child. Massa Clay ain't gonna hurt you. He just needs your help." Her face showed she didn't believe a word she said, but Amari knew she had to calm the child so as not to provoke Clay's anger. Clay grinned. "I have some friends visiting from Charlestown. We've decided to go alligator hunting this afternoon, and we need some gator bait." Teeny clasped her hand to her mouth. Amari saw desperation in her eyes. Finally, Teeny said, her voice full of pleading, "He be too young for such, sir." "He's just the right size," Clay replied, patting the boy on his backside. "He can't swim, sir," she implored. "Then he'll learn today," Clay replied. He glanced at Amari then. "Hey, Mina, you ever seen a gator hunt?" Amari glanced at Teeny before saying, "No, sir." "Then come and watch. I want my friends to see what I got for my birthday. Besides, I have missed your company," Clay said boldly. Amari wasn't sure what was happening or what she should do, so she looked at Teeny again. The look on Teeny's face truly frightened Amari, because for the first time since she had arrived at the plantation, Teeny looked terrified. "Go, child," Teeny urged her. "I pray you bring my boy back alive." "You never know," Clay said merrily. "Sometimes the gators are fast, and sometimes they are slow." Teeny wiped her hands on her apron over and over. "Please, sir, not my baby, sir." Clay ignored her. "Miner will return in a couple of hours with either a boy who's ripe to be gator bait again next week or a few of his fingers and toes left over to bury." Then he turned on his heel, and with Titbit still over his shoulder like a sack of flour, he headed across the yard. Amari followed, wondering what new cruelty Clay had in store. Titbit was only 4, but he knew when to keep his mouth shut. He stopped struggling and crying out, although Amari knew he had to be petrified. His eyes searched for Hush Puppy, who lay in the yard, licking his hindquarters where he had been kicked. When Titbit saw the dog was all right, he kept his eyes on Amari as she hurried behind Clay. Clay headed down to the river, whistling and stopping occasionally to spit. Amari had always hated the particular habit. Standing near the shore of the Ashley River ahead of them, Amari could see 3 young men about the same age as Clay. One, dressed all in leather, stood next to a handsome black horse that stamped his hooves on the soft grass. Another, who wore an elaborate lace collar and cuffs, looked overdressed even to Amari, who had no knowledge of the fashion of rich white youth. He gazed serenely at the water. The other young man, dressed more casually, had curly red hair like the sailor who had taught her words. He tossed rocks into the water as they waited for Clay. All 4 of them gave off an air of superiority and power that frightened Amari. Their presence made her even more wary of what might happen. The young man with the ruffled collar held about 100-foot length of rope in his hands. 4 muskets leaned against a tree, the branches of which hung over the water. 2 other horses grazed nearby. Clay called out to his friends as he got close. "Hello, feeling like a little gator stew tonight?" "If we're lucky," one of them replied. Evidently, the three young men thought that was so funny they laughed uproariously. Amari understood enough English to know that Titbit was in real trouble. I told you I knew where to find the best gator bait in the world, he boasted as he lowered Titbit to the ground. It seemed to Amari that Clay was trying a little too hard, talking a little too loudly, showing off for his friends. Just the right size, the owner of the black horse said as he poked Titbit with his toe. Titbit cringed. Amari wanted to reach out and comfort Titbit, but she dared not. The boy looked from Clay to each of the young men, and, though his little body shook with fear, he didn't make a sound. Taking the rope from his overdressed friend, Clay gave it to Amari and ordered, "Tie the rope around him, Mina." "So, who is this delicious slice of slave girl?" asked the young man dressed in leather. He reached over and patted Amari on her backside. With sudden fierceness, Clay jumped between Amari and the young man who had touched her. "Keep your hands off her," he snarled. "She's mine. That is why I named her Mina." Amari was so surprised, she dropped the rope. The leather-clad friend backed away and held up his hand. "I have the pick of the woman on my father's plantation," he said. "I was just asking who this one was." Clay, seemingly calmer, replied, "She was my birthday gift this year. I wanted the three of you to see her." Again, Amari couldn't understand why Clay acted as if he was proud of her, showing her off to his friends. She felt like an animal on display, almost as bad as the day she was sold at the market. She hung her head and wished she could disappear into the waters of that river. To Amari, Clay repeated, "Tie the boy with the rope. Make sure it is secure." Amari nodded and hugged the trembling child as she knotted the rope. She whispered into Titbit's ear, "Be brave, little one, and hold your breath." She stood up and reluctantly handed the rope to Clay. In control of the situation once more, Clay stooped down and said to Titbit, "All you must do is swim, little nigger. You hear? If you can swim faster than those gators, you get to go home to your mama. Understand?" Titbit quivered and nodded. He looked at Amari one last time before Clay picked him up and abruptly tossed him into the river. Clay held the rope while his friends laughed and cheered as the little boy swam for his life. "Now, would you look at that?" the tallest one called out, pointing to Titbit, struggling in the water. "The little nigger boy can swim." Titbit thrashed about hysterically, his tiny face wild with fear. "I've never seen anyone move his arms and legs so fast," Clay said, laughing. "All that splashing out to attract a gator soon," another one remarked. As Amari watched Titbit bobble in the water for the first time since she had been captured, she felt angry enough to lash out and kill. She was sick of tears, of submission, of putting up with inhumane treatment. She knew if she couldn't do something to save Titbit, she might explode. Finally, she could hold it in no longer. "Stop!" she cried hysterically. "Please stop! Bring Titbit back, please!" She broke down, sobbing. Clay's three friends stopped their cheering and stared in astonishment at this slave girl who had nerve enough to try to interrupt an afternoon sport. Clay, with surprising calm, told Amari, "If you don't let us continue, your little friend is likely to get eaten. Now shut up!" He did not hit her as she expected him to. Amari, defeated, looked from Clay to his friends in utter disbelief. This was beyond her grasp. To torture a child like this? What kind of people are they? And then she saw it. The dark figure of an alligator appeared in the water near Titbit's splashing feet. She held her breath. "Oh, look, here comes the first gator," called out Clay's friend with the red curly hair. Instantly, their attention turned from Amari to the river again. In one smooth motion, the lace-collared fellow snatched up his musket, cocked it, and fired. Kaboom! The musket's shot sounded like an explosion as it was fired at the alligator. The water turned bright red as the animal rolled over in the water. The startled horses reared and pulled at the ropes that tied them to the trees. "You got him, Conrad!" Clay shouted to his friend. Amari could see only bloody water and foam in the distance. She couldn't tell if Titbit had been shot or bit or had survived. She didn't know what she would do if she had to return to Teeny without the boy. "Good shot!" one of the others called out. "Pull the boy in and let him catch his breath," Clay ordered. "The next gator will be mine," he said as he checked his gun. Conrad hauled Titbit in. The boy, dripping with blood and water, scrambled up the muddy shore next to them. He was shivering uncontrollably, but he seemed unhurt. Amari ran to him, knelt down on the muddy river bank, and hugged him tightly. As she felt his narrow shoulders shake, the fury she had felt earlier began to build once more. She wasn't sure how much more of this she could take. She whispered in her native language the same words of comfort that Afi had once told her. In spite of all, you must endure, my little Titbit. The flame of your life spirit will not leave you. Then, because she knew he would not understand what she was saying, she told him in English, You will live. You are strong. Do you understand? Titbit nodded miserably. Enough of that, Clay shouted. He pulled Titbit away from Amari, made sure the rope was still secure, and pitched the boy back into the water. This time, 2 alligators surfaced. Amari wanted to scream out once more, but she realized she couldn't distract the hunters. They had to shoot, or Titbit would be attacked. She wished she could run and snatch Titbit out of the water and just disappear. Titbit paddled furiously as the alligator circled him. 2 shots exploded in the afternoon sunshine as both Clay and one of his friends fired at the huge reptiles. Amari wondered how much longer the child could be tortured so. Twice more, Titbit was tossed into the bloody water, and twice more, he barely escaped the jaws of the hungry alligators. It seemed to Amari that the young man always waited until the last possible moment to fire. Titbit almost seemed to be in shock by the time they finally decided their afternoon of enjoyment was over. He could barely walk. Amari ran and picked him up. It is getting late, Clay said to his friends as he untied the rope from around Titbit's waist. And this game is beginning to bore me. Let us retire to the house for supper, but I fear I no longer have a taste for gator stew. The other 3 young men reached with loud laughter as they readied their horses. The one who rode the black horse reached down and hoisted Clay up so he could ride with him. Clay looked at Amari and smiled as she tried to comfort Titbit. We'll have to do this again sometime. I had fun, didn't you? Yes, sir, Amari mumbled. Her fists were tight as she held Titbit. And Mina, he said, his tone changing from warm to cold in an instant. She looked at him in fearful expectation. Don't you ever raise your voice to me again. No, sir. Yes, sir, Amari stuttered. She knew she had escaped another beating, or worse. With that, Clay and his friends headed toward the north fields where the corn was grown, whooping like children as they galloped off. Amari and Titbit headed slowly back to the house. Neither of them spoke. Halfway there, Hush Puppy met them, limping a little, but wagging his tail energetically. Titbit fell to the ground and buried his head in the dog's soft fur.